Today's podcast is sponsored by Fire Facilities Incorporated, expert engineers, designers, and manufacturers of steel training towers, burn rooms, and mobile units that are all made in the USA.
Dave Mellen is a 23-year student in the fire service, and he has been a paramedic for the last 17 years. He currently serves as a career firefighter paramedic in a suburb of the Kansas City metro area, as well as a captain with the Reno Township Fire Department in Leavenworth County. He previously served as a lab instructor for the Johnson County Community College Fire Science Program, and he has sat on several review committees for fire training publications. Dave is an instructor at FDIC, Firehouse Expo, and several other state and local fire schools, as well as the owner of Valor Training. Now, before we get started, I need some help from my listeners. If you like what you're hearing and seeing, do me a favor and hit the like button and subscribe so you know when new content is available. I have some big stuff coming down the road, and I'd hate for you to miss it. And with that, Dave Mellen.
Welcome back to 3-Point Firefighter. Tonight is a guest I've been waiting for a very long time, Mr. David Mellen. David Mellen, welcome to 3-Point Firefighter.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, what's your favorite fire tool? No, I'm just kidding.
The Halligan. That's an easy answer. Halligan.
Really? Well, I'm glad you didn't say like a recliner or couch or memory foam mattresses. So you're right there. You're in the right place. Before we get started, I always like to start off with say, hey, tell me a little bit about how you got in the fire service and where it led to where you're at now. But before we get to that, I think everybody wants to know, in a mustache fight between you and Billy Goldfeder, whose mustache would win?
Dude, I'm not. Okay, so I don't think I'm anywhere near the Billy Goldfeder. I've stood next to Captain Dugan, Chief Goldfeder, and it's a different style. But I'm going to still say that they would win just because I don't want to find out. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. I hate to disagree with a guest right off the bat, but I think Chief Goldfeder's mustache is good. It's strong, but I don't think it has the cardio to go multiple rounds. Your mustache it looks great and it's lean. It's mean. I think it's got the cardio to last.
And I can do a really mean fisticuffs, right?
Oh yeah. You can do the old picture fisticuffs. Yeah. Perfect. So, brother, I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man and you spent some time with me. Thank you very much. I'd like to find out what got you in the fire service and how did it lead you to where you're at now?
Yeah, so it's actually a really interesting story. So when I was 4 years old, my parents tell the story way better than I do. But when I was 4 years old, my parents were sitting in the living room and I came downstairs and I went up to my mom and I said, Mom, I'm going to be a fireman when I grow up. And she said, okay. And that was it. And so they assumed that I was going to, the next week I'd want to be an astronaut. The week after that, I'd want to be the president. And I just never grew out of it. I don't have any family history of family members in the fire service. I just one day woke up and was like, I'm going to be a fireman. And that's really the only thing that I've ever wanted to do. I've tried Monday through Friday 9-to-5 jobs. They suck. I did some stuff in high school. I was a lifeguard and I got into the corporate world when we first had kids. I actually got out of EMS and went into the corporate world, and that was horrible. I couldn't do it. And so I only lasted about 7 or 8 months, and then I quit that job and went back to public safety. So, really it was just kind of, I've always had a love for the fire service. A lesser known fact is that my father actually used to sell fire trucks and ambulances. He didn't start doing that until I was 13 or 14.
Oh, wow.
And so, kind of growing up around that and getting to see the industry side of sales and equipment and stuff like that, I would go around and I would demo equipment with him. And so it was kind of a natural progression to what I'm doing now, which is, teaching, but I also talk about products that I believe in. I talk about the products that we use. And I tell people all the time, I don't sell stuff. I'm not making money off of this. I'm going to tell you what I use and what I like because I use it and I like it, not because I'm getting a kickback. And so it's funny because as we've gone out and we've taught, people are like, well, that's a really cool tool. I've never seen that. I'm like, well, let me tell you about it. I'm not doing it because I want them to buy it. I'm doing it because I like the product and I spent my own money on it. So that's kind of how I got to where I am today. I'm a career fireman outside of the Kansas City metro, and I volunteer as well out in Leavenworth County.
Okay. Now you said your dad sold fire trucks. Now, did he sell good ones or did he sell Ferraris?
So no, he, you know, they're all one now. They're all one part of one conglomerate, but no, this is, he sold E1 back when it was, E1. And then, it was right at the tail end when it became Federal Signal. He got out of it shortly thereafter, but, yeah, I mean, you know, he sold, I believe he sold the first Bronto in the United States to Muscatine, Iowa.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, so it was kind of cool. I got to go up like 215 feet in the air in a Bronto when I was like 15.
Phew. Yeah. Well, that probably reinforced the fact that you wanted to be a firefighter. So, you know, you said it at 4 and then 13, you start selling fire trucks and ambulances. You're like, well, it's meant to be. It's just meant to be.
Oh, it was cool, man. I used to drive him nuts. He'd go out there on the weekends to work on stuff, and I'd be out in the shop just winding up on the Q sirens. And I looking back on it, I mean, he passed away a couple years ago, but looking back on it, I'm sure it just drove him nuts, but he let me do it.
So let me ask you this. When it comes to a Q, are you a Q purist to where you got to have the up and down, or you just stand on it and just hit that high pitch all the way down the road?
Man, I got to be honest with you. It depends on my mood. The guys that ride with me, they know, if we're going to a good job, if we're going to something big, something good, man, I'll wind up on that thing from start to finish. If we're just kind of going, you know, if it's like a lift assist or, you know, a medical, I'll just kind of wind up on it here and there. But the one thing I won't do is use an electronic cue. I don't care if it has it on there or not. No. I won't use it.
No. That's just nonsense. Although we had, I worked with some guys that run an engine, and on their siren, no one ever used it, but they had a high-low. And so they used it every single time just for fun. You'd hear, I'd be driving downtown, I hear dee-doo. I'm like, well, here goes engine one.
Yep.
I've listened to you talk a couple times and seen and read a few things, and I know you've got a passion for training. Okay. So I myself am a training officer, and my side hustle is I teach 1403 around the country for, you know, instructors, live fire instructors. I too find it very difficult to merge reality without having that safety buffer. So what are some of the ways you go around and teach to, I know I've never heard you say, I get rid of 1403. I've heard you say it's a good framework. It's a good starting point, right?
Yeah.
So how would you advise some people, say, okay, you want to do live burns, you know, here's 1403, but here's reality. How do you merge the two?
Yeah. So before I get into that, I want to tell you a quick funny story. So I taught a class at FDIC this last year, Fire for Effect, the lost art of realistic training. And in it, we talk about the difference between burn buildings and burn props, or, you know, 1403 and 1402. And so when we were looking at all these different things, I'm talking about it in the class, and I wasn't bashing 1403. I wasn't bashing NFPA. But there was a guy sitting in the back, and I'm like, man, that guy looks really familiar. I know him from somewhere, but I can't figure it out. Right. And as I'm talking about live burns, he kind of perks up and he's really engaged. And I kind of said some stuff, and he gave me a frowny face, and I'm like, I don't think that guy liked that. And so he came up to me at the break, and he goes, hey, you know, I love what you're saying. He's like, you know, I've followed your stuff. Dave Casey from the NFPA committee. I was like, oh God. Ooh. Yeah. I was like, and he was like, no, he said, I love what you're doing. He said, you're not bashing it. You're saying, here's the framework. Here's how you can work with it. And Dave and I have since then had multiple conversations, and we have a healthy respect for each other. You're right. I don't ever bash on NFPA. I think it's there because of the mistakes of others. Mm-hmm. Those standards are written in blood, right? Literally. So yeah. So, I mean, you have to be aware of that, and you have to be careful with it. I think the problem that I have, and what I try to preach to everybody, is that the NFPA 1403 is written to give you the baseline standard that you need to follow. So you have to have an igniter, you have to have a safety, you have to have, you know, an incident commander, you have to have all these things that are in place for safety. That makes sense. And you should be doing that anyway. Mm-hmm. Where I kind of stray away from it is, you know, when people sit there and say, well, you can't have furniture. Well, you can have furniture, it just can't be combustible. So I can run down to the hardware store and buy patio furniture that's made out of metal. Mm-hmm. And I can put that in my burn building, and I can put it in the same room as the burn. And then I have furniture because it's non-combustible. I've talked to multiple people who do metal fabrication. And I've said, hey, can you build me a couple chairs? Can you build me a couch? Can you build me something that people can search and feel on that is non-combustible? That's allowed in the standard. And so again, as long as you're not doing hoarder stuff where you're blocking exits or blocking pathways,
Right.
those are things that are all permissible. The other thing is if I'm burning on the far, alpha side of a building and I have a furnished, room on the opposite side on the other floor, that's allowed. You just can't have fuel next to or in the same room as the burn. And so I think when you look at the standard and you look at how that's written, there's a lot of things that are permissible, but because people are fearful of it and because they're so afraid of litigation, they're like, oh, we can't do anything. It's just, we can only burn 2 pallets with a little bit of straw and we have to have 16 check lines. That's not the reality of it. And so it's almost like a breath of fresh air when, and judging by your demeanor and what I know of you, when we teach, it's a breath of fresh air for somebody who's been stuck in that culture of go in and it's 2 pallets and they put it out with 5 gallons of water and there's no thermal layer.
Right.
Because when we go in, they have fire rolling over their head and they're crawling down the hallway going, oh my God, this is crazy. I've never seen fire behavior like this. But we knock on wood, we've never hurt a student. We've never damaged equipment. It's always been done in a very managed, coordinated, safe way.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a big fan of 1403, obviously. But if you look at it, if you really read it, and of course you have to read it with safety in mind, right? And I get that from you. You're safety conscious. You want people to be safe. But if you read it with safety in mind, there's a lot you can do. I think it's written that way on purpose. If you take somebody, say, I don't know, a smaller rural department that doesn't have a lot of personnel, a lot of equipment, they probably can't meet 1403. You got to have a safety officer. You got to have 1 instructor per group, and they got to rotate and double IC, And I think it scares them off of even attempting 1403 because of that. Now, I know one thing, a big conversation around 1403 is the type of wood you can burn, right? There it is. Now,
we're going to go down that rabbit hole.
Well,
okay,
and it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Yep.
So I feel like I know the standard pretty well. What do you think about burning OSB?
So here's what I'll say. And this is, my opinion only, right?
Do you want, I'll go first if you want, if it'll help you.
No, I'll throw it to bro. Come on.
Okay. I want to make sure.
It's all good.
I want to make sure.
So we burn a lot of OSB. We use very little pallets because it's a very high heat release rate. I'm all about getting heat, but the heat is not my concern. The heat is a secondary byproduct to the fire behavior. I would rather have temps in the 300 to 500 range and have amazing fire behavior where we have streamers, we have rollover. I'm really big on taking a piece of carpet and throwing it out in the middle of the burn room when we're talking about build and fire behavior. And I want that thing to start off gassing. I want them to see that thing flash.
Yes.
And then I say, look, think about that piece of carpet being the whole entire room, right? I want the students to see that kind of stuff. But what I think is really funny is that the OSB to me gives the most amount of smoke with the lowest amount of heat, where you still get really good fire behavior. And people freak out about that. They're like, well, that's got glue and that's super cancer causing. And I'm like, hey, what kind of pallets are you burning? And they're like, well, pallets. I'm like, where'd you get them? They're like, Joe's hardware store down the street. I'm like, did you take a look at the pallets? Well, no. Are they treated with pesticides? Well, I don't know. Well, let's go look at your pallets. And every single one of them is treated with pesticides. Oh. And I'm like, so you're going to bug me about burning stuff that I know what's in the OSB, but you're sitting here burning pallets thinking that it's just like burning straw, right? It's not the same thing. And so I think as we're becoming more educated about carcinogens and things like that, it's a coordinated risk or a calculated risk, and we have to be careful of that. But I have seen a lot of people get burned with pallets and high heat when they didn't have those indicators of the thermal layering and stuff like that. Whereas with the OSB, I feel like you get a better idea. I mean, when you open up a nozzle and it starts whipping around and that thermal layer drops, you see it with OSB. Mm-hmm. You don't always see it with pallets.
True. Where I stand with it, love OSB for live burns. Love it. Can't get enough of it. Just that
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
1403 says wood products.
Yep.
That's it. That's a wood product. Dan Matukowski is doing a study right now for ULFSRI on the different types of OSB. There's two kinds, an A and a B.
Right.
Can't tell you which one's worse, which one's better. Me personally, I love it. I love it for the exact same reasons you say. It's got a lower heat release rate. It puts off a nice smoke. And if you do it just right, you can see thermal layering perfect. I mean, it's too good a tool not to be able to use as a training instructor. And if they make it to where you can't use it, what's the next step? Pallets, Excelsior?
Gas.
Yeah. What's next? Love OSB. I think it's an excellent tool. I do think you need to include it in your fuel package when you write up your pre-burn plan. I think that's no big deal. I personally we did a bunch of acquired structure burns a month or two ago, and we finally got to the point where the corner was all OSB above the set and on both sides, and it lasted longer. The structure lasted longer, and it would put off thermal layering, that big black smoke. It was great. It was a wonderful tool. Wonderful tool. So,
and it's funny because I took a piece of OSB. We don't get the opportunity to do a lot of acquired structures. And Dave Pruitt, who's one of the guys that works with us with Valor, he's the guy down in Texas who has like 150 some structures in his district that they can burn. And so, yeah, it's pretty amazing. He's like the guru of live fire and of acquired structures. And so when we do acquired structures, we always get him involved. But the last one that I did, I ripped a piece of OSB and put it above the doorway in the fire room, and I just zipped it in. And one of
below it a little bit to hold the smoke a little bit.
No. It was just right above the door jamb. Okay. And the guy kind of looked at me and he goes, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, you'll see." And he goes, "Okay." And I said, "Just, I know it's there. You know it's there. The safety line, the check line knows it's there. I mean, we're good." And so they, fire's going really good coming out of the doorway. Dudes crawl in the door. And as soon as they get about halfway in, the guy backing up the nozzleman looks up and goes, "Oh shit." He goes, "Fire above us, fire above us." And the guy takes his line and whips it behind his head and then just keeps hitting the fire.
Oh,
that's a neat little trick. So, yeah. And so when we got done, he goes, "Dude," he goes, "I've never seen that before." I said, "Right. Have you ever seen it on a real fire?" He goes, "Oh yeah." Because I've seen it on a real fire. People have signs, people have stuff behind them. And so think about that. You have burning stuff, trim, maybe it's up in the wall behind you above the doorway. And so having that little indicator of there's fire behind you, it's controlled, right? We know it's there. But it gave them that visual cue. Well, I can't take a 2x4 and tack it up there, right? It's not going to off gas and burn the same as that OSB.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was something that we replicated time and time again, and the students just loved it.
I think when you're dealing with OSB, because there is a cancer issue there, doing a field decon, try, do everything you can in your power to mitigate that problem. But, anybody that's ever burned pallets and just pallets, it's just not the same. It's just not the same. So,
and I think it has its place. I mean, if you have new students, and you're trying to show them build and growth, I think it definitely has its place. I even think gas props have their place, just not inside of a burning building.
Yeah, that's what I've got, all gas. And then I got my chiefs to let me make the bottom class A.
Yeah.
So I'm tickled to death. And class B is great up to a point. And then for new guys, I think really, because it's such a controllable atmosphere environment. But I agree. So you mentioned Fire for Effect earlier, one of your classes you like to teach. Now, I've heard a lot about that in the Perfect Storm class. Tell me a little bit more about the Fire for Effect.
Yeah, so really, we have always prided ourselves in being realistic. We want things to be as realistic as possible. There are things that people know I have done that I won't admit I have done on this show. You know what? I will. Screw it. So, listen, I understand you can't have live victims in live fire, right? Like that's a huge no-no. I have stood on a balcony of a fixed fire facility with fire coming up the stairs from a first floor fire coming up the stairwell. And I'm perched out on the landing, in the smoke, waiting for people to come get me. And it adds a different element to it, right? And I'm always screaming, my kid's right inside the window. I can't get him. Or I'm throwing a baby at him, or I'm doing whatever. And
now, is this with or without clothing?
This is without. I almost always do it without. And listen, I'm not a sadist. I don't like getting hurt. But there are, when we've done theatrical smoke, right? One of my favorite ones, this happened down at Lake of the Ozarks. And this will kind of sum up how we do it. So the students had gone in, they'd done drags, without smoke, without fire. And so they were getting really cocky. They were like, hey man, I got this, 150-pound dummy, no big deal. And so you could see that they were like built up and they were excited. So the first round that we did with theatrics, because we crawl, walk, run. So they do it with no theatrics, then they do it with fake smoke, then we do it with live fire. Mm-hmm. So during the smoke, this guy crawls in and I can hear him searching, and he's like, all right, I got a bed. And he's talking to his partner who's healing the wall. And he's like, all right. And then he comes over to me and he's like, all right, I got a foot. And he moves his hand up my thigh. And he's like, all right, I got a leg. And then he just stops for a second and I can see his face like right next to me. And he looks, he goes, it's a naked guy. And the dude at the doorway is like fully naked or kind of naked. And he's like, I don't know, but all I see is skin and I saw a nipple. And so it was like, it totally threw him for a loop. Right. And so he said, hey, I'm going to need help because I'm a bigger dude. So when he came up to me, he leans down and he goes, dude, do you want us to drag you? I'm like, absolutely. And so they're dragging me on the concrete and my back is just wrecked, man. I mean, I could feel every move that they're making and it hurts. And so I'm screaming out. I'm like, and he goes, you want me to stop? I'm like, fuck no, just keep going, And so when we got to the stairs, they stopped and communicated with each other. And they're like, hey, don't let his head hit the stairs. And so they're moving me down the stairs. Well, I just watched them do all 4 groups. I just watched them carry that mannequin down the stairs where the head's just going bump, 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 bump. Right. So having a real victim in fake smoke is a lot different than having a dummy or a mannequin.
Right.
And so, even getting out on a ladder when I'm conscious, I'll sit there and pretend like I'm scared. I don't want to get on a ladder. I don't like heights. I don't want to get out there. And they're like, dude, you got to get on the ladder. I'm like, I'm going to fall. And then when I get out there, I'm death gripping them. And they're like, no, you have to, So again, that's kind of the whole idea behind the class, is how to create realism safely. And then how to take your training and make sure that you're reinforcing the things that are really going to happen in real life. So a lot of times with training, we're guilty of this. We're all guilty of this. It's fragmented, right? We're only going to go over one type of search or removal method. We're only going to go over one type of stretch with the hose line. Well, that's great. But what about truck positioning? What about, forcible entry? What about the other things that are going to mess up your hose stretch or your search? And so making sure that we're incorporating that in so that you're not just getting these one-offs.
Well, I gotta ask you, did you plan on being that victim before that class, or did something happen during the class? You're like, okay, they need to get it in their head what a live victim is. And then where did you go from there to no clothes?
So the natural progression of this whole thing, the first grab that I had pulled out animals and stuff, right? But the first human that I ever rescued out of a fire, I was like, dude, that was nothing like what we trained with. That was not at all. I mean, I had a semi-conscious guy that just needed help getting out.
Right.
I mean, he couldn't see. He's gagging on the smoke. He's coughing and hacking. And I know where I'm going, but he doesn't even know the layout of his own house. And so I'm holding his hand and I'm, he's crawling and, ducking down. And I led him to the front door and we went out the front door. It was a living room fire and he was trapped in the bedroom. They had already got it knocked down. And I said, do you want to go out the window? And he goes, please don't break my window. I said, okay. I mean, he was cool with it. He's like, hey, just let me, can you get me back to the front door? I said, yeah. I said, can you hold your breath? He goes, sure. He didn't hold his breath. He took a huge gulp, but
that's self-correcting.
Yeah. And so, but it wasn't like anything that I had trained with. And so and that was like 2007, 2006. And so I was like, man, when I start teaching, I'm going to make sure that I do it realistically. And so based on my experiences, based on the experiences of people that I've talked with who have made way more grabs than I have, we very quickly decided to incorporate live victims. The getting naked thing was a way for me to just mind screw people. Because, I mean, think about it. The last time you went to a fire, or in your training thing, right? What's tied around your mannequin right now in your firehouse?
Around mine?
Yeah.
Mine's just taped up. I don't know if it has anything really tied around it right now.
Okay. So most fire stations, thank you for saying that. Most firehouses, when you walk in, they got a big old webbing loop tied right around that mannequin. No. Right. And so, they're used to going and grabbing the mannequin, and they just grab the strap and drag the mannequin out for the weight, but they're not actually using their arms or, leg locking or whatever. And so that was the thing, is we wanted to force them down a path where they were going to have to do it as realistically as possible. And very early on, we had a lot of success where we were getting emails and phone calls of students who went out to make actual grabs. And they're like, dude, it was exactly like we did it in class. It was slippery. They were wet. They had burns, whatever it was. They were like, I tried plan A. It didn't work. I moved to plan B and we drugged the victim out. And that's the best thing that you can hear as an instructor.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, have you incorporated any like moulage into it to where your skin's peeling off when they grab you, anything like that?
So if you want to call it moulage, you can. We use KY, right? I'll go to the store, which for those of you listening or watching, do not go into like a Walgreens or a Walmart and try to buy like 60 boxes of KY lube. It looks extremely odd to those cashiers.
And a fifth of tequila. That's it.
Yeah. So, but no. So I mean, we use KY. We use Dawn dish soap. The KY for us was the best option because it's water based, so you can literally just rub your hands together with your gloves, and eventually it's going to kind of absorb in, and it's done. The Dawn you actually have to wash out, otherwise it leaves that tacky, kind of sticky residue.
Mm-hmm.
But either or, the one thing you want to stay away from is like a oil based or grease. I've heard people talk about like Vaseline. Don't do that, because once you get it into your gear, you're never going to get it out.
Yeah. Plus it's flammable.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah. So we've done the lube. We have done wounds, right? Like I did a bleeding wound. I had a huge fracture in my leg and had IV bag filled with fake blood up here in my chest. And so when they lowered me down the ladder, I'm doing this on my chest and it's just squirting everywhere. And then we get down and I'm like, my leg. And they're like, holy shit. And so it makes them get out of that mindset of we're just doing firefighting stuff. You pull a victim out and they have burns or fractures, you're still gonna have to take care of them.
So I guess you're trying to put more, always talk about your brain as a Rolodex. And every time you have an experience, you throw it in there. Hopefully you're making some new cards for them, but that's something you would call the OODA loop?
Yeah.
So you're trying to teach, because if I've heard you correctly in the past, that's one of the things we need to consider when we're training new guys or training anybody is the OODA loop.
Yeah. So yeah, there's two parts to it. And real quick, if I get too long winded, just give me the thumbs down or something.
Never.
So
I've been wanting to talk to you for a while now, so you're not going to get a thumbs down from me.
So there's two parts to it. There's the OODA loop, and then there's recognition prime decision making. In order to get to RPDM, you have to get through the OODA loop, right? Mm-hmm. So when I'm crawling into a house and I'm crawling down a hallway and I'm sounding the floor and it goes, tud, 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 thud. And I go, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right, or that doesn't feel right. That's that OODA loop of I observe that the floor doesn't sound right, something doesn't feel right, or the floor starts to droop, or whatever it is, right? So you have to make a decision. So you have to go all the way through that OODA loop process. Okay, can I back up? Is the floor just slanted because I'm going down a ramp, or is it slanted because the floor is starting to give out? Well, we know based on statistics that 9 times out of 10, if you go on a floor that's going to fail, you're not going to know it's going to fail before it does. It's just going to drop. So there's that pucker factor, but then you go through in your head and you're like, okay, I've done this, or I've seen this, or I've experienced this. So then you go to your recognition prime decision making, and then it's okay, well, can I get over this? Can I go around it? Should we back out? Do I need to call Mayday? And so it goes hand in hand. And so when we do training, if they're going to do a rescue, right, we're doing search, we're going to throw obstacles in their way. So for the OODA loop part, I'm going to have a victim's family member out front screaming and yelling at them to shake them up. Then when they get inside the house, I'm going to tell them point blank in the front yard, my baby's in the top floor. My baby's on the top floor. Well, I'm not going to tell them where.
All right.
So is it on the second floor, or is it on that half story? I might go put them up on that half story, right? Because I didn't say what the top floor was. And so then they go into that recognition prime decision making. Is there a bedroom on that half story? Do we need to go search that? And then once they find the victim, what's the best way to get out? I may add in, hey, command interior be advised, we just threw a ladder to the Alpha Bravo corner. Well, now they know that there's a ladder there. So it's up to them to recognize that during that OODA loop process. Holy crap, I just found a victim. The first instinct is we need to run out the front door, just like the way we came in.
Right, right.
Well, I already gave them the answer. If there's a ladder at a window on the second floor and you're on the second floor, put them out the window. Right. So you're building and you're molding. And so even if they don't get it, that's okay. When they come out, I'm going to say, hey, that's great that you guys brought the victim right back out the way you went in, but walk with me. And we go around the side and I say, what window were you in? What room were you in? That one. What's right underneath the window? A ladder. Okay. And then they get it. So
right. Now, do people that take your class at this point have got to realize all the curveballs you throw? So are you still getting a lot of surprises, or are you having to up your game to do stuff like that?
I think that they expect it. They just don't know when it's coming. And so, I'll go 3 or 4 scenarios and not do anything and not mess with them. And then I'll go one where they're expecting me to come out. And it's funny. I've seen guys open up doors and they're doing this. Right. Because they're expecting me to jump out in my underwear and start screaming in Spanish. I don't.
They're disappointed. They do your whole class and they're like, hey, did you get to see Dave Mellen naked speaking Spanish? No.
So it's, you got to switch it up, but they do understand. But again, that's a visceral response. I don't care who you are or what you do. I've only seen a very few people who just didn't react. Like I'm sitting there screaming and yelling in my underwear and they're like, all right, man. And then they just continue on. It's very few and far between. So as much as they're prepared for it because of what they think they've heard or they've seen, they're not prepared for it when it happens.
So go back a little bit. You were talking about, coming out the way you came in. And that's one of the things, whenever I teach, I try to teach, the best way out. It's not always that way. And also when I'll see truck companies go into search, they'll follow the hand line in because that's the door that they opened. So they're like, well, naturally I need to go straight through that door and then start my search.
Sure.
So, and positioning, same thing. Positioning, I've seen people, they'll tell you the right way to position, but as soon as a house is on fire, they stop right in front of the house that's on fire. So I guess my question is, do you see a lot of people with these default settings in their brain, training scars, and do you think that you can help break those scars up in just 1 or 2 classes? Or is it something that they got to take back and work on?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there's always, there's always continual growth. That has to be part of it, right? Like whatever I teach, whatever you teach, I want them to go back and train on that for the rest of their life. Like, not to be cocky, not that I think that they're going to go back and train on the stuff that I teach them for the rest of their life, but in a perfect world, they would, because then they get really good at it. So what I find a lot is that people who have that mindset of, I've been taught plan A and I'm just going to stick with plan A because that's what I'm comfortable with. You've got to find something to show them the why. If they don't understand the why, they're never going to do it. Right. So what I'll do is and whether it's with a thermal imager or I'm seeing it with my own eyes, if I see them find a victim and drag that victim back down the stairs and out the front door, I'll time it. I'm counting in my head, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. When they get that victim outside in our classes, they have to start CPR if they're unconscious and don't have a pulse. So they'll start that process. And after they're done, when we're doing our hot wash, I'll say, hey, let me ask you a question. What was the fastest way to get that victim out? I don't know. Okay. Well, did you have like a balcony? Did you have, when you did your 360, what did you see? Well, off the second floor, there was a walkout onto a patio or onto a deck. Okay. Was the deck on fire? No. Okay. So where were you when you found the victim? Like 3 feet from the door. Okay. Do you know how long it took you to get outside and start CPR? No. Minute and 37 seconds. Oh. How long would it have taken you to go out on the back porch and start CPR? 10 seconds. Okay. Which one's better for the victim? 10 seconds. You know what I mean? So once you put it into perspective like that, they're like, oh, holy crap. I didn't even think about that. Right. So like EMS.
They're turning the switches themselves.
Yeah. And that's what I like to do is I like to create the environment to where they come up with the solution themselves, because otherwise it's just me regurgitating shit to you, right? Like if I regurgitate stuff to you, that's great. And you might take something from it, but I want you to come up with your own conclusion. So for example, we had a department that came to one of our search under live fire classes, and we taught them some maneuvering and some stuff with live victims and communication. And once they were on the receiving side of it, because we made them be the EMS crew, and they're like, man, that sucks when all of a sudden out of nowhere, this victim just pops out of the door. We don't know if they're conscious. We don't know if they're burned. We don't know anything. So then we had them experience that where it was very well laid out. You know, I have an unconscious victim. I believe they're in cardiac arrest. Their skin is burned. We're on our way out the alpha side. Well, now they have all their stuff set up. Well, fast forward about 3 months after this class, and they had an actual grab. And when they drug this dude out, the EMS crew already had the cot at the door. They put the guy right down on the cot. The paramedic was already had the fast patches out. He slapped him on real quick. They had a pulse before they ever left the scene.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I mean, he already had his intubation stuff laid out in the back. I mean, as they were listening to the rescue, they're like, okay, he's unconscious. He's probably in cardiac arrest. He's not breathing. They're bringing him out the alpha side. So the EMT is positioning the cot. The medic's getting all the stuff ready for ALS. It just flowed. And so they came up with that on their own. I didn't teach them that. I just showed them that it works better if you do it this way. So yeah, that's kind of what our goal is to get them to come to those solutions. So then they could put it into that Rolodex.
Right. I got to mention, say this real quick. Whenever I interview somebody that has a podcast, big shout out to Valor Fire Training podcast. It's nice because they have a nice microphone and headset. So, you know, nobody's ever sounded crappy. Don't get me wrong, but there's a big difference between, you know, talking to somebody with a nice microphone.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I always struggle with is making it as real as possible. And the problem I keep coming up with is after I do the training that I'm proud of, that I try to think around the corners and outside the box and everything. I'm like, all right, that was a good training. About a week or two later, I'll read an article or watch a video, listen to a podcast, and I'll be like, shit, I didn't even think about that. So it's for me, it's constantly adding to my training because of people like you that go out there, and I think it was Ty Rondo that said, spread the poison. You're out there, spreading that poison.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, but here's the thing, man. I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing the same exact thing. I could go do the best class I feel like I've done, and then a week later, I'll go to another class as a student and be like, oh, I'm stealing that. Yeah. Oh, I'm using that. Right.
Yeah.
So I think the second that you walk in and go, nah, this is the level of my class and it's never going to get any better.
Right.
You know, now I've gone one direction and maybe gotten a little bit too crazy. And
wait, crazier than the things you said already?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's gotten pretty bad. It's gotten pretty bad.
I'm digging in. I can't wait.
So I was at
now, is this a David Mellen first?
This is yeah, this will probably be a Dave Mellen first. So
firefighter on the cutting edge. Just saying.
I was at an unnamed department, which will remain nameless. But they had a really, really nice fire facility. It was Class A, but it was very well insulated. And so I felt very safe. We actually blocked off 2 parts of the building, right? So I went up to the 2nd floor. I'm hanging out, waiting for the ladder team or the crew with the ladder to come around the building. And the fire was burning on the 1st floor. I didn't have any heat. I had 0 heat. Fake smoke on the 2nd floor, live fire on the 1st floor. And as I'm standing there, I'm in my underwear, and it kept getting warmer and warmer. And I'm kind of hanging out the window, and I'm, get puffs of fake smoke, and I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. Well, then it was like the smoke would puff and my eyes would start burning a little bit. I'm like, man, that's like real smoke. And I'm like, hey, are we starting the evolution yet? And they're like, yeah, we're getting there. Hold on a second. They're stoking the fire on the 1st floor. And I'm like, okay. So I'm looking behind me and I'm like, man, it's getting really kind of warm in here. And fast forward about 30 seconds. And I'm like, hey, I was like, why don't we start this scenario? And they're like, no, we're getting there. And I turn around and I look and I just see an orange glow coming up the stairwell. And I'm like, oh shit. So I crawl back to the stairwell. The door that we had closed and shut, somebody had walked by and opened.
Oh.
So all that heat, I mean, it was like a chimney. All that heat was coming up to that 2nd floor, which is big enough that I could get away from it. And I was okay. But dude, my back hair was starting to burn. Like it was hot. It was really hot. And so when that ladder crew came around, it was a truck crew. They came around, and I don't remember a lot of this because I was almost in panic mode. I'm straddling the windowsill, hanging out the window in my underwear, and I'm screaming like, get over here, get the ladder up here, I'm burning up. They're like, dude, you're a really good actor. I'm like, no, I'm literally burning. Like, I'm getting hot. You need to hurry up and come get me. And so, you know, there was a lot of communication that was going on. I advised the guy that was safety. I'm like, hey, just so you know, that door's open. And he's like, we're going to shut it down. I'm like, no, dude, we're good. We're good. Like, I'm outside the building. We're good. We're okay. And so he said, I'm going to shut some other doors and we're going to keep it isolated. And they did. And it was never to the point where it's like, I'm laying in the burn room.
Right.
I don't want anybody to walk away thinking that. But the fear that was in my eyes, I can only imagine what those students were thinking, because as soon as that ladder hit the building, I grabbed the rung and pulled it to me. And I was on that ladder sliding down like 5 seconds flat.
You know what's cool about that story is, well, the whole story is cool, but
it wasn't cool at the time, man.
It wasn't cool at the time. But just think about this. We never, ever, as firefighters, get to know what it's like in the victim's role for real.
Yeah.
And you did. You knew exactly how a victim felt. Did that change how you did things anymore? Or do you feel like you were already working in that direction anyway?
So whatever, I've already gone this far. So that wasn't the first time I had been in that kind of situation. That was the first time that I wasn't aware that it was going to happen.
Right. There's
a lot of pre-planning that goes into it. And I think we all know our comfort level of, you know, I can duck in real quick and make sure that they're okay, and then I'll come back out. It put a different respect for being the victim, because I was at the point where, I mean, I had snot coming out of my nose. I had the fear of, I'm actually going to get burned. I didn't, but I was like, man, I'm going to end up getting burned on this deal. And I'm straddling that windowsill. And I remember thinking, the more that I got out of the window, I'm like, ooh, this feels better. Well, this feels even better than that. Well, this feels even better than that. And I mean, I'm holding on to that windowsill and I'm straddling on it, but I'm hanging out. And these dudes, when they came around the window, I can only imagine what they were thinking, because their eyes were like that big.
Yeah.
I mean, but it gave them a really good experience. It gave me a very good experience. So we all learned from it. But those are the types of things that I like doing, is the one-offs that you're not going to get every single time.
Right. Well, you know, you can't have a live victim in live fire, but it's invaluable if you're wanting to teach firefighters the right way to do stuff, giving them that realism. Now, with that being said, I think I would do what you do. If I ever did that, I would want to be the one that's going to be in trouble, nobody else. I would never in a million years ask somebody else to do that. So kudos to you, man. I mean, you you put your money where your mouth is on that one. And several times, it sounds like.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, you bring up a great point. You know, I am ultimately the one who's going to be doing that kind of stuff, because I would never ask any of my guys to do that. And I've had guys be like, hey, I'll do the next one. And I'm like, no, you won't. Right.
I bet you'd be more nervous about that than you being inside.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I mean, it's just like anything else. I mean, when we do acquired structures, there's a certain level of pucker factor, because there are some unknowns. You know, we don't know the exact dimensional lumber that they used or things like that. And so I'm definitely calmer or more laid back on a fixed structure than acquired. And it's just like that when we do live fire stuff. I am more laid back when we're just doing dummies than if I'm the guy that's, you know, hanging out by the front door waiting for the crew to show up and I'm going to pop out. There's a certain level of like, okay, guys, let's hurry the hell up now. It's getting a little toasty.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me a little bit about stress inoculation. I mean, it sounds like that's what the path you're on right now anyway. So what are some other ways that you use stress inoculation to make better firefighters?
So, and I'll be fully transparent. There are so many people out there right now that are doing way better stress inoculation stuff. Rick George is like the guru from Florida. If you want to do an amazing stress inoculation class, take his firefighter resiliency class. It's amazing. But what we have incorporated into our stuff is we want to get people into that condition gray. We want them to lose motor function. We want them to get tunnel vision. We want them to experience that auditory occlusion, because it's in a controlled fashion. They can observe others and others can observe them. So I'll use this as an example. You get a new firefighter in your department, right? And they're new, they have no experience. They run the first big fire that they've ever had in their entire career. And their heart rate's 160, 165. And they start getting that auditory occlusion and you're yelling at them like, hey, aim the hose over there, or do this or do that. And they just stare at you because they can see your lips moving, but they have no idea what you're saying to them, right? Or even worse, you have a mask on and they can't see your lips moving and they're not hearing what you're saying. Well, what are you going to say about that firefighter after the fire?
Bad things.
Yeah, they're slug, they suck, they didn't listen to me, right? We
Right.
created that. We totally created that situation. And so I think back to my career, you know, how many times did I do that to somebody, or how many times did I in the company officer role look at somebody and be like, dude, this person sucks. Well, maybe they didn't suck. Maybe they just didn't understand what I was saying because they couldn't process it.
Mhm.
And so when we create that in training, it's amazing to watch people walk in there kind of bravado-ish, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. You're never gonna, you know, fluff me to get me all riled up, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like watching them try to manipulate things or do things and they can't. And so we use stress inoculation as a tool, not just as the whole class. We want to incorporate that into what we're doing. And so like our medical response to the firefighter Mayday class, it's a RIT class. We do firefighter survival and RIT stuff, but 90% of that class is what you do after you get outside the building. And so it's fun to watch those paramedics that are like, oh, I've been a medic for 15 years. I'm great at starting IVs. Okay. And then you watch them try to open up an IV and they can't get the package, right? Because their fingers don't work anymore because their heart rate's so high.
So how do you get into that condition gray then? If you're doing a training and you want to get your students in condition, a gray area, how do you get them there? What do you physically do to them to get them there? So you can get them, so you do your next step, which is mess with them. So, you know, they can't process what you're doing or saying.
Sure. So we try to calculate. It differs from each class, right? And it differs depending on what kind of building we're using or what kind of training we're doing. But you have to spread things out and you have to maintain a physical exertion level. So like they'll start out getting off the rig. Well, we're going to have them get off the rig and then they're going to stretch 150 feet. So they're going to have a long stretch, right? Then they're going to get to a door prop. Well, that door prop, I'm going to put a couple extra pieces or an extra wedge in there.
Mhm.
So it's harder for them to force. So now they're swinging the axe, they're prying, they're doing whatever they're doing, but it's harder than it would be if we were just doing forcible entry. I want to exert themselves. I want them to exert themselves. Then once they get in, you know, we're having them do things. We're like, hey, it's high heat. You got to lay on your stomach. That's how high the heat is right now. So now they're having to open up the line and flow, but they're also down in a prone position. So it's harder for them to move their muscles. And so we're just trying to get them to work their heart rate up. That's all we're doing. And then we're throwing in psychological stuff. Like we'll have a boom box going with smoke detector. But if we had the volume on 50, we're going to jack that volume up to 100, right? We want it to be so loud that it's messing with their head.
Right.
And I don't do the music thing. That's kind of, I want it to be something realistic, or the sound of crackling fire.
Right.
So all those things, the mental and the physical, that's getting their heart rate up. And we'll incorporate radio traffic. You know, I'll have an incident commander that's kind of an asshole who's screaming on the radio. You know, Engine 6, give me a report. What are you doing in there? You know, so now they're having to answer the radio in addition to all the other stuff that they're having to do. So what we found, and we did this with a couple different people at the beginning, we usually can get people up to that like 150 to 170 pretty quick if we're making them go through all those steps, because it's just constant physical exertion mixed in with psychological stuff. And so once they find the victim, once they find whatever we're making them try to do, now they're going to have to do more physical exertion to get them out. But as soon as they cross that threshold, we're so used to high five, put the dummy back, and we go back, right? Mm-hmm. Well, now we tell them, hey, you got to start CPR. Here's your med bag. Open it up. Start running a code. And we have an AED simulator. You'd be amazed at how many people put the pads on backwards. They can't start an IV, or they can't spike an IV bag.
Wow.
Because they're so, I mean, they're so not in that mindset. And because of all the other things, whether it's auditory occlusion, loss of motor function, something is going to get them. And that usually humbles them pretty quick.
I noticed you're repping Isaac Frazier's hat into the job.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, I took a class from him, a street smart extrication class. And one of the things that he had us do was in gear, do push-ups and jumping jacks before we even touched a tool for scenario. So I assume that's basically the same thing, getting that heart rate up, making everything harder on you. And it is true. I mean, if you sit there and say, okay, there's the dummy in the car, you're going to use this tool, extricate, blah, 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 go ahead and go. Yeah. Their heart rate's not going to be up like in a real world situation. So that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, are you ever worried about people that maybe aren't in the best of health and getting their heart rate up that high and then putting them to work?
I mean, that's why we have waivers. I mean, yeah, I mean, there is always that risk, right? What I tell people is we're going to watch you. We're going to monitor you. Anytime that we incorporate stress inoculation, we always have an actual AED, right?
Mhm.
And we don't use our real stuff for training. Like if we have a real AED, when I go to a department, I'm like, hey, you guys ALS? Yes. Great. I want a life pack or I want a Zoll monitor on site so that if we need to do a 12 lead, if we need to, where's your closest ambulance? We're doing that for like a search class because
Wow.
we're going to be exerting them that much. But everybody needs to know their limit. And so what I tell them is if we hear you hyperventilating, if we hear you struggling, we're not going to let you get to that point where you just shut down and vapor lock. And we've had students, one of my favorite pictures of Rick George, he's actually standing there. He's completely drenched in sweat. This student looks like he's about to black out, but Rick has this dude by the coat and he's holding him and he's staring at him. And in that picture, if you talk to Rick, he's actually talking him down because that kid was vapor locked. I mean, he was, oh yeah. And so Rick recognized it. He grabbed him, and I'll let him tell the story. If you talk to him, it's a great story. But I will pull somebody if they're hyperventilating. I'll grab their regulator and I'll get face to face with them. And I'm like, listen, breathe, take a breath, calm down. What are you trying to do right now? I'm trying to get the victim out. Okay, where are you struggling? I can't figure out which way is left and right. Okay, stop for a second. Which way do you remember coming in? I remember turning right. Okay, so which way do you need to turn now? Left. Okay. And then I watch them turn left and they go down that hallway. That's positive reinforcement. And so in that moment, you're taking them where they're freaking out and you stop, you give them the right answer. And that's how they're able to put it into that Rolodex.
Well, that leads us right into the perfect storm. Another class you teach. Tell me a little bit about that.
So that one is pretty near and dear to my heart. Anybody that knows me knows that I've been testing my manager's anger management skills for years. Actually, just William Knight has that in his bio. He says he's been where he's at and testing the anger management skills of his supervisors for years. I've always had a different view on life, I think, when it comes to keeping myself out of trouble. I'm always looking at the worst case scenario. When I book a flight, I'm like, am I going to have enough time for that? What if this happens? What if that happens? I'm not that type of person that I can just be like, whatever, we'll figure it out. I have to be, somewhat calculated.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got into the fire service, I watched as things wouldn't be the way that they were supposed to be, but people minimized it. And eventually that came back and bit me in the ass or bit the department in the ass. And so when I created this class, it was based around a lot of the things that I've learned in history over my lifetime, where it really came down to one very minuscule event that cascaded and continued to be one catastrophic failure. So the station nightclub fire, I talk about that a lot.
Yeah, that's the one where just one little check box from
one little check
would have changed everything. Yeah.
Yep. And people believed at the time, right? People believed at the time that it was grandfathered in because of the date of the building's construction. That would have made sense, except for the fact that they changed occupancy, which should have voided that. But that checkbox never got checked, so they just never put in a sprinkler. The Challenger space shuttle, 2 scientists walked in and said, those gaskets are not designed for the temperatures. We don't think you should launch. And they said, what's the over under? What's the chances it's going to blow up? And they said, we don't know. They said, well, we can't delay this any longer. So they launched it, and what happened?
Yeah.
So, and I mean, there's probably 50 other scenarios that I use. And it's not just firefighting. There's, law enforcement. You have an officer who makes a really poor decision at one department and ends up being released, goes and gets hired in a neighboring department and ends up accidentally shooting somebody. Right? It was a pattern of poor behavior that led to that. So in the class, what we talk about is how to recognize those things and how to prevent those things from happening. And so the goal for the student is to walk out with a new view on everyday operations, a new view on, the ramifications of what they're doing from day to day on their department, on themselves. And we've had really good luck with students afterwards. But more importantly, we've had a really, really good interaction with leadership. So city councils, township boards, governing bodies, chiefs associations. Because when a fire chief walks in, and I'm not one, right? But when a fire chief walks in and says, I need more money, the bean counters are looking at the beans. That's it, right? So if they say no, they're saying no because they don't want to give you the money. They're not saying no because they see what possibly could happen if you don't get the money.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to have that healthy respect. And so we've had a couple times where we've been lucky enough to go deal with governing bodies. And then I talked to those chiefs afterwards and they're like, yeah, I walked in and I said, this is serious. We need to spend money on this to prevent this from happening. And they said, is this going to get us in trouble if we don't do this? And they're like, yeah, it could. And then they ended up getting the money. So there are things like that where, you know, it's just having a different view on how we operate and not getting ourselves into that. Yeah, sweep it under the rug. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Right. And then next year you're sitting in a courtroom.
It reminds me of the Brett Tarver incident and how Chief Alan Bruincini, you know, pretty much, he wanted to know what happened. So he let the investigation go where it went. And, you know, he didn't try to hide anything, just the opposite. He was like, you know, here's everything, because he was dedicated to not having that happen again. Yeah. So that's amazing. I've been part of a line of duty death, and I remember none of it seemed like it was going right from the dispatch on to when Chuck passed away. That's what 646 is right there. It's his badge number. But I remember hearing the initial dispatch and everything just started to like fall apart. I was like, well, that's weird. Well, that's weird. And a friend of mine in the department, he was with me. He was like, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. And then we go, and on the scene, everything just kept, it was just like, once the dominoes started going, I don't know if anybody at the time had the wherewithal or the training to pick up a domino ahead of the game so it would knock the rest of it over. I know that everything was done as absolutely the best they could, because hindsight's 2020. But I do remember that, and I know I've heard you talk about that before. Is just, you know, one small thing set in motion, and if you don't get ahead of the game, it could have catastrophic ramifications.
Yeah. And, you know, I stay away from specifics, right? Like when I'm in a class, I'm not going to sit there and say like, oh, here's the line. I stay away from line of duty deaths, right? Like we'll talk about some situations and the things that led up to it. But I want the people that were there to tell that story. I don't want to sit there and tell somebody else's story. I'll talk about historical events, right? But when we talk about, you know, certain line of duty deaths that I've talked to people that were a part of, you know, crew getting overrun by fire. So I don't like telling other people's stories, right? So we try to stay away from line of duty deaths. I want those people that were there and experienced that to tell that story. But, you know, talking to guys who have had near misses and line of duty deaths that I know who have been there, something as simple as the hose crew getting overrun by fire. And it was a selectable gallonage nozzle. It was turned down to 65 gallons a minute. They never checked it. They went in and started fighting fire. They got overrun because they weren't putting out enough water. The nozzleman hadn't been trained on, you know, how to recognize that. And so it just cascaded, right? You could have the driver operator pumping the right pressure. Everything's supposed to be the way that it's supposed to be. But that one little click of that dial to 65 instead of 150 or 165, whatever it is, that made the difference between them getting overrun by fire and bailing out of a window or getting a broken leg or possibly dying, all because somebody didn't check the truck, right? But that same person that didn't check the truck has not been checking the truck since they got on that shift. And it's culturally accepted on that department that, you don't really need to check your truck. When you open up the nozzle, water goes on the fire, it goes out, right? So when you look at the worst possible case scenario, I find myself, and now in places that I work, because I'm so emphatic about it, I'll watch as guys will walk around the station and they'll be on the phone with their wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And they'll walk by and look down and go, click, 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 click. And they'll flip that nozzle back to 150 because somebody left it on 65 after a car fire, or a gated Y, and they'll open it back up because we leave our pre-connect on our front bumper on a gated Y, and somebody will shut it and they'll be like, nope, open it up. So when the driver charges the line, water automatically goes to the nozzle.
I hate those mystery nozzles. I hate mystery nozzles more than anything.
I know.
That and booster lines.
So no, it's that's kind of the basis of the class. We dive into quite a bit of examples, and people are usually really surprised. I mean, a lot of people don't know how preventable a lot of these things really were.
It's scary when you go down that rabbit hole, how many are preventable, because you don't want to, I don't think most people, obviously not Alan Brune C, but most people don't want to recognize that it was a preventable death, you know, and they'd rather think it's easier pill to swallow, just say, well, it was his time. It was their time. You know, I think about victims a lot of times where people, they got firefighter will go into a house, there'll be a dead person, they'll bring them out, and it's like, well, they're dead. I always think about what could have we done better to get to that person quicker? How do we know they weren't dead, but 2 seconds before we got there, or they were alive before we got there?
Right.
And so I always think that way. I'm like, you know, hey, wow. Nick Pepper, he was telling me a story about how he saved a guy, him and his officer saved a guy, and it was successful, but he was miserable with his performance. And he turned that corner, and everybody's like, hey man, way to go. Good save. And he was upset with himself because he felt like he struggled when he shouldn't have struggled. And he did mention that, you know, training and that were two different animals.
Yeah.
That was nothing like any training he's ever had.
So we had, you want to hear a story?
Absolutely. From Greenville, yeah.
So if there was one time where you didn't want things to go wrong, it happened to me. So we got dispatched to a house fire in 2014. It was May 13th, 2014. It was like 4:30 in the morning. We got dispatched to a house fire. We showed up. The guy was standing in the front yard screaming that his family member was trapped in the house. So I was the lieutenant on a pumper. It was a combination department. So I was a volunteer. They had part-time and full-time. So we had a crew of 4. And when we walked in, I split the crew in 2. I said, you guys grab the hose line. We're going to go in for a rescue. At the last minute, we were getting ready to do a vent inner search on the Delta side. And the chief yelled on the radio and said, hey, come to the other side of the house. I got a doorway. And I'm thinking, man, it's 4:30 in the morning. I don't think they're going to be in the kitchen, but whatever. And so when we got over there, he said, I heard screaming in that room. I said, all right. So we crawled in and made it through the living room. And I remember seeing fire dripping from the ceiling. And I was like, man, that doesn't seem right, but it's starting to get the couch. And Chris, oh yeah. No, I mean, it hit me. I was like, ooh, that doesn't look right. And I remember looking up into the attic and I just saw fire. Like there was a hole and I saw fire and there was shit dropping on the couch and the couch is starting to burn now. And so Chris, the guy that was with me, he goes, are we going or not? And I said, yeah, we're going. And I don't know if I said or if I thought, you know, man, I hope this hose line comes in behind us pretty quick because this is going to get really shitty. And so we made it to a T hallway. Chris went right. I went straight. He found a commode and a bed and he's searching and he didn't find anything. When I opened up the door to this other bedroom, I got down underneath the smoke layer. And when I took my flashlight and swept, I saw 2 feet kicking out of the closet. And it took me a good 3 to 5 seconds for me to be like, what is that? Oh my God, that's a victim, right? I mean, it took a second to click. And so when I grabbed this lady and I started pulling her out in the hallway, I remember the back of my neck was hot. The top of my head was hot. I was breathing warm air. And I'm thinking, these are all the really bad things that you hear from the senior guys.
All right.
Like, hey, if it's hot enough for your head to be hot, you're in deep shit. And she's screaming, I'm on fire. I'm burning. Oh my God, help me. And I remember looking behind me to my left and all I saw was orange. And I'm thinking, man, this isn't adding up, right? So I key up my mic to call that I'm bringing a victim out and it dies. The radio doesn't go. And I'm thinking, that's weird. I just pulled it off the truck, right? So about the time that I hit halfway in the hallway, we were wearing MSAs. It starts going ding, 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 ding. Now we've only been inside for like 3 minutes. So my low air alarm shouldn't be going off. So we make it to the doorway. I shut the door behind me. We're in that first bedroom that Chris got to. We put this lady out the window and a hose line comes in. We're trading. And so Chris takes the hand line. We open up the door. We hit the fire. We were maybe in there for another minute or 2. And then they said, hey, get out. The roof's starting to bow down. And so we crawled out the window that we put her out. And as I'm standing there in the front yard, all I see is people staring at me with these huge eyes. And I'm like, oh God, am I burned? Like, is something wrong? You know? And they're like, dude, where's your helmet? And I'm thinking, oh shit, I must have lost my helmet when I crawled in, right? And so all these things are starting to play out. And then I'm like, wait a minute, where was the hose line? Why did it come through the front door or the front window? And so come to find out, here was kind of the events that led up to it. When I got off the rig, I couldn't get out of the seat because my air pack was stuck because somebody wove the air pack strap through the back frame. So I had to take my helmet off, put it in the dash, turn around and mess with my pack to get it to come out. I clicked it just like I had a million times, but when I sat forward, I was stuck. So I had to unbuckle myself, get my air pack out. That was problem number one. Problem number two, when I said, hey, grab the line, come in behind us, they made it about halfway through the yard with the pre-connect and then realized that they were dragging the coupling through the yard with them. Somebody had put it back in the tray and put the tray back in the crosslay, but never hooked it to the truck.
Huh.
Right? So think about that. 2 issues in one fire. Then go to use my radio, right? It wasn't my radio. I grabbed the one off the truck. Well, somebody had put the radio back in the charger, but didn't actually make sure that it's seated in the charger. So it was in there, but it wasn't actually charging. So that battery was dead before I ever even got off the rig. So all these things started kind of compounding. And the last part was when I came out, I'm like, I lost my helmet. That explains why my head was so hot, right? And I walk over to the bumper of the truck. I throw my shit on the bumper and I look up in the dash and there's my helmet. Right. So the icing on the cake in that moment, I was so frazzled and my OODA loop was so messed up. I didn't even remember taking my helmet off and putting it on the dash. That's the first fire in my career that I ever, and hopefully the last, that I put my helmet down and forgot to put it on when I went in. So the ending of the story is that this lady lived. She was 104 years old. Her name was Ann Jarrett. She had no neurological deficits. She was in the hospital for one night for observation. They kicked her out the next day. And she told me afterwards, because she said, oh, honey, you guys did such a great job. And I said, Ann, if you knew all the problems that we had. And she looked at me and she goes, you know what? If it was meant to be, it was meant to be. All those problems taught you a lesson. But at the end of the day, you guys got me out. And I was like,
wow.
She didn't care if we were volunteers. She didn't care what color fire truck we showed up on. She didn't care about any of that shit. All she cared about was that we came in and we got it right. And so the perfect storm was part of that whole event. And I talk about it a lot in the class. I'm like, if you think for 1 second that these things aren't going to all sneak up on you, we had problems with people putting the crosslay back, but not connecting it to the truck, or cross-threading it and thinking that it was on, but it really wasn't. We had problems with people not filling the air bottles after training. And that's what ended up happening.
What was your low air alarm from?
So somebody had, sorry, I forgot to mention that one. So somebody had used that pack for training the night before or the day before, and got it down to right above low air. And I don't know, hell, maybe their girlfriend called or whatever. So they just threw the pack back on the rig and I'll fill it later. So we ended up catching a fire the next morning and ended up making a grab off of it. So it's just little things like that where all it takes is one thing. Now, those were like 4 things that all happened at once. But that's how this stuff happens, right? So
that's wow. Any one of those is enough. You had all 4 of them right then and there on a fire with a rescue.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, none of them were like, oh my God, I'm going to die situations. I mean, the head getting hot, I was getting pretty worried. And now looking back on it, I think it probably worked out for the best because it made me more aware of protecting her, because in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, it's about to flash on us, which it probably wasn't in that area where we were. But in my mind, because of the helmet not being on, I'm trying to protect her more than I probably would have, because I perceived that heat to be worse than it actually was. So it all ended up working out. But those are just 4 things that happened to me on one fire, one day on my career. What can happen to you? It can happen to any one of these listeners.
Well, I got to know, and I'm sure people are listening, got to know, whose ass did you get into when you got back to the firehouse, or at least a shift change?
It was talked about. There were some very strong discussions. Nobody ever fessed up to it. And at that point, I didn't really care. Ann was an amazing person. I got to be friends with her. And I think the bigger takeaway from that whole deal for me and her was it didn't matter who messed it up. it gave me the ability to go on and teach the perfect storm, or to be able to pass that along to the next generation so that that doesn't happen to them.
Right.
And I'm okay with that. If somebody would have fessed up, I probably would have taken them out in the back parking lot. We would have had some educational discussion, but
Percussive maintenance.
yes. Yeah.
But it's like you said, it was an ugly road to go down, but the road was leading somewhere. Obviously, you had to go down that road to get where you're at today. That's amazing. That's a scary ass story, though. I ain't gonna lie.
Well, and and I didn't realize, again, it's hindsight being 2020. Like I tell a great story now, but at the time, none of those things clicked. Like I didn't realize that my radio wasn't working. I thought to myself for half a second, why is my low air alarm going off? But then I didn't care because I'm trying to get this lady out. And so a lot of those things, it wasn't until I actually sat down and realized the totality of what had just happened that I started getting like visibly upset. I mean, I was pissed because of all these little things that went wrong. And it wasn't until she looked at me and she said, honey, none of that matters. You guys came in and you got me. That's what the important thing is. And I'm like, yeah, she's right.
Wow. That's powerful. That really is powerful. Holy cow. Brother, I appreciate you being on my podcast. I know you, people should go to your website if they want to see where you're going to be at, which is going to be valorfiretraining.com. Ton of good classes there. Obviously they come from real life experience, like you were saying. You also do a podcast, Valor Fire Training podcast. So judging by the classes you teach and the conferences you go to and the podcast, that gives you about 17 hours of sleep a year. Is that about right?
That is right. My wife, my family comes first. I have two boys, Aiden and Leo, and then my wife, Katie, and our golden doodle, Halligan. So
nice.
Halligan. Yep. He's a 100-pound golden doodle. But, my family comes first. They are amazing when it comes to giving me the freedom to be able to go do those things. The boys travel with me. Aiden has gone to a Bears of the Oath and a couple other conferences. Katie and I will take trips if it's somewhere warm and tropical.
Yes.
And so, she's great about letting me be free when I need to be free, but also keeping me grounded. And so, yeah, I have my hands in a lot of different things. But what people notice is that for every one thing that they're watching, that probably happened, a couple of weeks ago when I had like 5 minutes free that I could jump on and do something.
Yes.
So just like you, man, just like you, it's all about the schedule.
It is. But I'm always impressed with people like yourself that are going around, not just helping their fire department, not just helping their county or their state, they're helping the United States fire industry with their teaching and training. And then they have time to sit down and talk to little old Jakey Barnes. That's amazing. Amazing.
And
so, I'm sorry, go ahead, brother.
I was going to say, I mean, I've been waiting to be on this podcast for a while. So it was an honor. I mean, when you sent me a message, I was like, absolutely.
There's a few people that I'm a little nervous to interview, and I don't know why. I really don't know why. You were one of them, and then the other one is Jason Patton, and he's going to be on end of the month. And I just got to get over this because I'm like, I fanboy. I'm not going to lie. I fanboy over people that are here. I call them landscapers. You're changing the landscape of the fire service. Yeah. So I was a little nervous about sending that message. So, and there's a few out there that I still haven't sent to other people. I'm like, who am I to talk to this person? But no, I appreciate it.
I will say this, and you can edit things and chop up what you want, but I will say this. I have had this conversation 1,000 times, and I'll probably have it another 1,000 times with other instructors and other students. I cannot tell you how many times I've walked in as recently as a month ago at a fire conference, and I walk into a room and I'm like, oh my God, that's so-and-so, or, oh my God, that's so-and-so. And maybe people walk into a room and go, oh my God, there's Dave Mellen. I don't know. But there are so many instructors out there that are like me and you and everybody else where we still get starstruck. Yes. I met Jason at FDIC. We did the hot seat episode where we ate the hot wings with Firefighter Fenton and Jeremy from National Fire Radio. And when I talked to those guys, I'm like, hey, I don't know if you'd be interested in this, but I got this thing called the hot seat and we do the chicken wings. He's like, oh yeah, you're the chicken wing guy. I'd love to do that. And I was like, really? Like, you really do? And he was like, absolutely. And so I'm sitting there, right next to Fenton with the big mustache, eating chicken wings. And I'm like, how the hell did I end up at a table with Jason and Brent and, blah, 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 blah. And so, but that's that healthy respect. The
Right.
second that you walk in and go, I'm the biggest person in the room, you shouldn't be in the room to begin with.
No.
So it's great, man. You're not alone.
I think it's great though that you're in the fire service as long as we are, and you fanboy over other people. I mean, there's
Absolutely.
people that are going to get in the fire service and leave the fire service and probably do a great job, but never know who Patty Brown is, or never know who Forrest Reeder or Rob Ramirez, or fucking Devin Craig, on and on and on. And that's a shame. That's a real shame, because these are people that are doing things for every firefighter, whether you like it or not. These tactics, these strategies, these classes are filtering through the entire United States. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You go out and you teach a bunch of people, they take it to their fire department. It goes on and on and on, it pays it forward. But anyway, I could talk about that shit all day long. Again, brother, thank you for being on my podcast.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. It was great talking with you. Take care.
See you, buddy.